I've been working for 5 years now. This is the first time my mom takes the initiative to call me to go home for the holidays. So I travel home with heaps of luggage. Still, I managed to free one hand to produce an envelope filled with cash and give it to my mom. A grin blooms on her face instantly. But when she realizes that there's only $10,000 in the envelope, her grin starts to falter. Oh, it only makes sense that you're the most manipulative out of the bunch after all these years. I pause momentarily as I'm about to go through the front door. You've been working for quite a few years now, and yet you only bring home 10,000 bucks. Meanwhile, Sabrina gave us $100,000 in her first year of working a nice job. Having a bachelor's degree definitely pays off a lot. Upon noticing how stunned I look, my mom yanks the gifts over right away. Don't go around looking as though we owe you a life debt, Regina. See, Sabrina has better grades than you, and she doesn't have the intention of hiding anything from us. The gifts she always brings us are top-end supplements, so you should stop bringing us cheap stuff like this. I can only grip the hems of my shirt tightly. But the thing is, I'm the one with better scores back then. Regina, what are you standing there for? Give me a hand. Mom saw me frozen in place and shoved the gift bags toward me, telling me to open the door. The moment I watched her toss the gifts I'd spent time picking out straight into the storage room, like they were nothing, my heart sank. Mom, I put a lot of effort into picking them out too. She waved me off impatiently. All right, I heard you. That's your problem though. You're always so sensitive. You're not nearly as sensible as your sister. She dropped onto the couch and immediately started rambling. Your sister got into such a great university back then, and she's always been hardworking. She's busy now, sure, but the moment she came home, she handed over $100,000. And you? I remember your first year working, you brought back, what, $3,000? I lowered my head slightly, standing there awkwardly, unsure whether I should sit or keep standing. Mom, I could only work as a regular employee at a cafe my first year, but I saved that money bit by bit. If I get promoted to manager next year, I'll be making more. The more I spoke, the more nervous I felt, like I was bracing for her to snap again. Mom gave an exaggerated eye roll. What's the point of making more? Even if you do, you still won't live as well as your sister. Regina, how did I end up raising such a disappointment? Look around. Who has a kid as useless as you? Your sister's younger than you, and yet she outshines you in everything. Her words saddened me, and my voice caught. Mom, I barely make it home for the holidays. Can you stop comparing us? To my surprise, the moment I said that, she slammed her hand on the table. What? Can't I talk in my own home? She shot to her feet and jabbed a finger toward my chest. Look at yourself, Regina. If you don't compare yourself to someone better, would you rather compare yourself to someone worse? Tell me, what does your sister not do better than you? She kept jabbing at me until I stumbled backward, humiliated, but she didn't care that I was close to tears. Back then, your sister scored over 1,100 on the SAT. And what did you get? You couldn't even get into university. I sniffed and stood there in a daze. That wasn't true. That wasn't what happened. Back then, right after the test scores came out, I had overheard Mom and Dad talking. We only have enough money to send one kid to university. What are we supposed to do? There has to be some way around it, Michael. Besides, it's not like both of them are guaranteed to get in. We'll wait and see. At the time, I had been standing outside the door, holding my test results. It showed I'd gotten over 1,350, but I stood there for a long time and couldn't bring myself to push the door open. In the end, I quietly went back to my room. We weren't poor, but we were far from well off. We lived in an old apartment building in a rundown neighborhood. Their words had cut deep. Not long after, Sabrina came home. She rushed inside, beaming, and the first thing out of her mouth was, Mom, Dad, I scored over 1,100. The second they heard her, they came hurrying out to celebrate. Oh, wow. My sweet girl got over 1,100? That's amazing. Let me see it. Wow, it really is over 1,100. You really made us proud. As I listened to the laughter in the living room, I slowly folded my own slip back up. I didn't want to make things harder for them, so after taking a moment to steady myself, I pushed the door open and spoke. Mom, Dad, I only got in the 900s. I probably won't be able to get into a good university. Let Sabrina go instead. The moment she heard me say that, Mom's expression shifted, and she started cursing me out. Your father, and I fed you, clothed you, raised you, and this is all you got? Dad let out a cold laugh. I knew this girl would never amount to much. I stood there and took it, all while meeting Sabrina's smug expression. Regina, don't you usually get such good grades? How do you end up scoring so low this time? Now you can't even get into university. That's such a shame. You weren't cheating before, were you? I was mortified. I twisted the hem of my dress in my fingers before finally managing to come up with an excuse. No. I just didn't do well this time. That only made Mom even angrier. What exactly are you trying to say, Regina? Don't think for 1 second I'm letting you take the test again. If you can't get into university, then get out and find a job. No one's paying for another year of school. That's not what I meant. My voice broke, and in the end, my tears fell. From that moment on, the way my parents looked at me changed, and Sabrina and I ended up going down 2 completely different paths. Mom, I didn't score that low back then. I scored over 1,350. I forced the words out with everything I had. Mom froze for a second, then stared at me for a long moment before speaking. Regina, what kind of fantasy are you living in? Are you out of your mind? Or am I? The way she said it made me panic. No, Mom. I still have the slip from back then. It's saved on my phone. I'll find it. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through it in a rush as tears continued to stream down my face. How pathetic of me. Even after all this time, I would still cry whenever something like this happened. I kept scrolling through my gallery until I reached the pictures from when I had first started working. Back then, I messed up almost every day and got chewed out by my manager constantly. I barely had enough to eat myself, yet every month, I still sent half my salary back home. And every night, when I got back to that tiny rented room, I would look at that photo. I often found myself wondering whether things might have been different if I'd told them the truth about my score back then. Would they have celebrated for me the way they celebrated for Sabrina? If they had, maybe I wouldn't have had to struggle this hard. Maybe I would have had a different life, too. Over the past 5 years, I had spent 4 of them watching Sabrina's university life through the photos she posted on her Instagram. From the day she moved onto campus as a freshman to the day she graduated in her cap and gown, every one of those moments belonged to the life I had given up. Did I regret it? I didn't know. A few years ago, I probably would have answered without hesitation and said no. But now, all I could say was that I didn't know anymore. That feeling only became stronger the more I grew up and the more of the world I saw. Even so, I kept reminding myself that I couldn't say anything because I couldn't make things harder for Mom and Dad, and that I shouldn't let myself become bitter like that. After all, they had always loved Sabrina more. Even if I had been the one with the better score, they might not have been happy for me anyway. I kept scrolling through my gallery, but no matter how far I went, I couldn't find that old test slip. Mom rolled her eyes at me, full of contempt. That's enough, Regina. I know you're just trying to protect your image, but do you really need to lie about something like that? If you ask me, you never had that good a score. Since when did you get so comfortable lying? Her words hurt so badly that I could barely breathe, and tears kept dripping onto my phone screen. Why? Why couldn't I even find the only photo that could prove what I had scored back then? Wasn't the whole reason I gave up going to university so Mom and Dad wouldn't have to make such a difficult decision? If that was true, then all the years of hardship I went through barely amounted to anything. My voice broke as I uttered each word with effort. I'm not lying. What did you say? Mom frowned as if she hadn't heard me clearly. I raised my voice. I said, I'm not lying. She took a deep breath and visibly tamped down her temper, clearly annoyed by my crying. Then, she waved her hand dismissively. Enough. Stop crying. If you want to cry, go to your room and do it there. I've had enough of this. As she spoke, she stood up and was about to shove me. Crying is all you know how to do. Can't I speak my mind around you? You were the one who couldn't get into university back then. Don't stand there acting like your father, and I owe you something. As she shoved and hit me without the slightest bit of mercy, I couldn't keep it together anymore and finally shouted back, but I really did score over 1,350. Why won't you believe me? Meeting her startled eyes head-on, I continued, You've always been like this. Every time I did better than Sabrina, nobody said a word. But the second Sabrina did better than me, she became your precious daughter, all over again. Mom, I'm your daughter too. How could you do this to me? Mom froze, then slapped me hard across the face. Oh, so now raising you is our mistake? You ungrateful little brat. How dare you talk to me like that? Her tone sharpened, and the next slap landed against the side of my head. My face was swollen, but the tears hung stubbornly in my eyes. So, you never loved me, did you? Even though I was your first child. Mom's hand stopped midair. She stared at me in shock. Before she could finish, I heard the sound of the lock turning at the front door. Mom, Dad, and I are back. Look what I brought you. Sabrina's bright and cheerful voice rang out from the entryway. Oh, you're back, Rena. Mom, whose face had been twisted with anger a second ago, instantly broke into a smile. She hurried over and took the huge bag of snacks from Sabrina. Looks like you bought yourself something good to eat. That's my girl. You know how to enjoy yourself. Sabrina's gaze casually swept past my puffy, tear-streaked face, completely unmoved. Oh, Regina's home, too. She then turned to Mom. Mom, look what I got you. Like she was pulling off a magic trick, she pulled out the newest phone from her pocket. At that moment, Mom's smile was genuine.
Oh, wow.
Why did you buy me something this expensive? The phone you got me last time still looks brand new, and now you bought me another one. She turned it over and over again in her hands like it was a treasure. This is the newest model, right? And you even picked the color I like. You're amazing, sweetheart. I sat there awkwardly, not knowing what to do, until Dad noticed I'd been crying. He casually pulled the smallest bag of snacks from the pile and handed it to me. What's wrong? Arguing with your mom again? Give it a rest. That's just how she is. You're a grown woman now. Why are you still so immature? You're too old to be sniveling like that. I slowly reached out and took it, but I didn't eat it. If I hadn't taken it, Dad would have scolded me anyway. He was rarely ever that pleasant. Sabrina tossed her designer purse aside, stretched out on the couch, and smiled at me. Regina, why are you arguing with Mom again? Don't tell me this is about the SAT. It's been years already. Even if you did score over 1,350 back then, Mom and Dad could only afford to send one kid to university. I stared at her in shock, and when I spoke, my voice came out hoarse. What do you mean by that, Sabrina? You knew I scored that high this whole time? She picked up the remote, turned on the TV, and answered casually, Of course I knew. My fists tightened, my chest heaving with every breath. You knew? Then why didn't you say anything all those years when Mom was screaming at me? And back then, why did you accuse me of cheating? The entire living room went quiet. Mom and Dad exchanged suspicious glances, their expressions strange. What's going on?
Did she really score that high?
Mom's eyes darted back and forth between Sabrina and me. Meanwhile, Dad crushed out the cigarette in his hand and looked over at me. That's enough. What's done is done. Regina, you're not a kid anymore, so just let it go. I sat there without saying a word. I just felt disillusioned. Mom busied herself pouring a glass of water for Sabrina, never once considering that I hadn't had a single drop of water since I walked through the door. All of a sudden, I understood what Sabrina meant. She was right. Even if I really had scored over 1,350, would anything have been different?
No.
They still would have chosen to put Sabrina through university, and I still wouldn't be worthy of a glass of water. I looked at Sabrina, my voice shaking. Sabrina, why didn't you tell them? She met my gaze head-on, malice flickering in her eyes. Would it have made a difference? I don't think so. Beside her, Mom slammed a glass onto the table. Haven't you had enough? So, what if you really scored over 1,350? That doesn't mean your life would be any better after university. If anything, it was better for you to get out into the world early and toughen up. You were so shy when you were little. And now look at you, talking back and arguing with your own mother. Isn't that proof you needed to get out there? I honestly couldn't believe those words were coming out of her mouth. Get out into the world? Toughen up. I spoke softly and slowly, then suddenly laughed. Mom, was living in a tiny room with barely enough space to move around supposed to toughen me up? Was being screamed at by my manager until midnight and not being allowed to get off work supposed to toughen me up? When I first started, I couldn't even find a decent job. I washed dishes at a restaurant all winter long, and even now my fingers ache so badly every winter that I can't sleep. Is this what you call toughening me up? Mom seemed momentarily thrown off by my string of questions, although her confusion quickly curdled into defensive rage. Regina, what is wrong with you today? Have you lost your mind? We're living just fine, and you just have to stir things up, huh? My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe as a wave of dizziness hit me. Yeah, I said. Maybe I have. I've been through so much these past years, and all you have to say is that it was to toughen me up. I turned to leave, but Mom grabbed me. All right, that's enough, she said. Sending you into the real world earlier was an opportunity. You've been working years longer than your sister, and aren't you doing fine now? Dad stepped forward as well. That's enough. It's the holidays. Why are you making a scene? Don't get so worked up. Come sit down and eat. Your mom and I even have some good news for you. At dinner, Mom placed 2 drumsticks onto Sabrina's plate, one after the other. Rena, eat more, she said. You've gotten thinner again. Is work too stressful? If something's bothering you, just tell me, all right? Sabrina merely coughed once, and Mom was already on her feet, heading to the fridge to grab her a chilled bottle of juice. Ever since we were kids, Sabrina always had a glass of juice with her meals, while I never did. I ate in silence, the food tasting like nothing. I couldn't even tell what I was doing here anymore. Mom noticed my expression and tried to soften her tone. That's enough. Don't act like you've had it so hard. Back when your sister was working out of town with us, she didn't even have a birthday cake on her birthday. Now that things are finally better, why do you have to keep bringing up all these dusty, old grievances? Be honest with yourself. Ever since you moved in with us, haven't we treated you well enough? I didn't respond, merely lowering my head to hide my eyes. Back when I stayed with my grandparents, I had never celebrated a birthday either. Mom and Dad only went back every few years. To me, they felt no different from family members who came to visit during the holidays. Moreover, the first time I ever tasted cake was at Sabrina's birthday. Dad took a sip of his wine and added, "You've been working all these years, and it's not like you were sending any money back. How hard could it have really been?" "Dad, how can you say that?" I asked quietly as an exasperated laugh slipped out of me. "Haven't I been sending half my paycheck home every single month?" "What paycheck? I've never seen a cent of it," Dad shot back. I pulled out my phone and pulled up my bank statements. I've been transferring money to Mom's account every single month, and I never missed a single time. In the last 5 years, those transfers total $150,000. How could you not know? The silence in the dining room was so absolute, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Dad's hand, halfway to his mouth with a glass of wine, stopped. He slowly lowered it, his eyes darting from my phone screen to Mom's face. "What are you talking about, Regina?" Dad's voice was dangerously low, stripped of its usual dismissive tone. "150,000. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes locked on my mother. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sallow and suddenly very old under the harsh dining room lights. I set the phone down in the center of the table. The screen glowed, displaying the endless scroll of banking transactions. Transfer to Maria Lynn, $2,000. Transfer to Maria Lynn, $2,500. Transfer to Maria Lynn, $2,500. Month after month, year after year. I worked double shifts, I said, my voice eerily calm. The hysteria from earlier had burned out, leaving nothing but cold ash. I ate boiled cabbage and rice for 2 years. I walked 3 miles in the snow because I couldn't justify the bus fare. Every time I had a little extra, I sent it home because Mom said Dad's back was acting up, or the plumbing needed fixing, or the property taxes went up. Dad turned to Mom. "Maria? What is she talking about? The roof leaked last year, and we had to take out a loan. You told me Regina refused to help." Mom's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. She looked at Sabrina, then at Dad, her hands fluttering nervously over her plate. It wasn't that much. She's exaggerating. You know how she gets, Michael. She's trying to start a fight. I have the PDF statements right here, Mom. I interrupted smoothly. Do you want me to print them out? Where did the money go, Maria? Dad slammed his fist on the table, making the silverware rattle. Sabrina shifted uncomfortably in her chair. For the first time all evening, the smug, effortless grace had vanished from her posture. She pulled her designer purse a little closer to her feet. That tiny, subconscious movement was all the confirmation I needed. A sickening realization washed over me. It felt like I had swallowed a stone. "The $100,000, I whispered, staring at Sabrina. Sabrina's eyes flicked away from mine. She took a sudden, desperate sip of her juice. "What?" Dad barked, looking back and forth between us. "The $100,000 Sabrina gave you guys," I said, the math finally clicking together in my head. "The nice job. The big bonus." "Sabrina, how much do you actually make?" "That's none of your business," Sabrina snapped defensively, her voice pitching up. "It is my business," I shouted, the raw volume of my voice startling even myself. "Because it's my money. Mom didn't just take my paychecks to fix the house. She sent them to you." I looked at Mom, whose trembling lip gave it away. "Didn't you, Mom? You used my blood and sweat to fund her comfortable little life, to pay for her dorm, her clothes, her vacations. And then Sabrina comes home, hands you a fraction of the money I earned, and you praise her for being a devoted daughter. You don't understand." Mom suddenly shrieked, tears springing to her eyes. But they weren't tears of guilt. They were tears of panicked defense. Sabrina was at a good university. She was surrounded by kids from wealthy families. Do you know how cruel kids can be? If she didn't have nice clothes, a decent car, she would have been bullied. She had to network. It was an investment in her future. And what about my future? My voice cracked, but I forced myself to hold her
Gaze.
What about my life? You're just a waitress. Mom spat out, the venom returning now that her secret was out. You don't need a nice car to wipe down tables.
Your sister is a
Corporate consultant. She needs to look the part. We are family, Regina.
we.
Sacrifice for the one who has the most potential. That's how it works. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the linoleum floor. Dad was still staring at Mom in disbelief. You let me take a high-interest loan while you were funneling 50 grand a year to her, he muttered. The betrayal in his eyes was real, but it wasn't for me. He was angry he didn't get his cut. I've heard enough, I said quietly. Sit down, Regina, Dad ordered instinctively, turning his anger toward the easiest target. We haven't finished eating. I'm done eating. I'm done with all of it. I walked past the dining table and went straight to the guest room where my heavy, cheap suitcase sat on the floor. I hadn't even unpacked. I grabbed the handle and rolled it back out into the living room. Mom jumped up from the table, rushing toward me. What are you doing?
It's Christmas Eve.
You can't just leave. What will the neighbors say? Tell them I was too useless to stay, I said, grabbing my coat from the rack. Regina, stop being dramatic. Sabrina called out from the table, rolling her eyes, though her voice shook slightly. If you want the money back so badly, I'll pay you back when I get my next bonus. God, you're so petty. I paused at the front door. I looked at Sabrina, really looked at her. Beneath the expensive blowout and the silk blouse, she looked terrified. She knew she was a fraud. You don't have a bonus, Sabrina, I said, my tone laced with a profound, sudden exhaustion. If you were making the kind of money you claim, you wouldn't need Mom to siphon my minimum wage into your checking account.
Keep the money. Both
of you. I pulled my house key off my keychain and tossed it onto the shoe rack.
It
landed with a sharp metallic clink. Regina. Mom grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my jacket. If you walk out that door, don't you ever come back. We won't give you a dime when you fail. I looked down at her hand. Then I looked into her eyes. Mom, I said gently, you never gave me a dime to begin with. I've been the one keeping you afloat. I pulled my arm free, opened the door, and walked out into the freezing winter
night.
The cold air hit my face like a physical blow, but it felt clean. I didn't cry. For the first time in 5 years, I didn't shed a single tear over
them.
I hauled my heavy luggage down the cracked pavement of my childhood neighborhood, pulling out my phone with my free hand. I opened my banking app. I navigated to the scheduled transfers. Recipient, Maria Lynn. Auto transfer on the 1st of every month. I hit delete. A prompt popped up. Are you sure you want to cancel this recurring transfer? Yes. Then I went to my contacts. I blocked Mom. I blocked Dad. I blocked Sabrina. I walked to the nearest cheap motel by the highway, paid for one night in cash, and locked the door behind me. I sat on the edge of the stiff, scratchy bed, staring at my red, calloused hands. They ached from the cold just like they always did. But as I sat there in the quiet room, a strange sensation washed over me. It was a terrifying, expansive feeling. For the first time in my life, I had no family. I had no safety net. But I also had my entire paycheck. I lay back on the bed and, to my own absolute shock, I started to laugh. The next morning, I took the earliest bus back to the city. My tiny rented room, which had always felt like a prison cell of my own failures, suddenly looked
different when I walked in.
It didn't look like a punishment anymore. It looked like a blank canvas. The holidays passed in a blur of double shifts at the cafe. When January rolled around, my manager, a stern but fair woman named Claire, called me into the back office. You've been pulling a lot of weight, Regina, Claire said, looking over her paperwork. You're always on time. You never complain. And frankly, you're smarter than half the people I've hired with business degrees. She looked up, her piercing blue eyes meeting mine. The assistant manager is leaving next month. I want you to take the spot. It comes with a salary, health insurance, and paid time off. A year ago, I would have deferred. I would have thought I wasn't good enough. That someone like me, someone who didn't go to university, didn't deserve a salaried position. I'll take it, I said without missing a beat. And Claire, I want to know what I need to do to become a general manager in 2 years. Claire smiled. That's the spirit. With my promotion, my income effectively doubled. And because I was no longer bleeding $2,500 a month into my mother's bank account. My savings exploded. By spring, I moved out of the shoebox room and into a modest, sunlit one-bedroom apartment. I bought a comfortable mattress. I bought a thick, warm coat. I went to a doctor for the ache in my hands, got prescribed proper medication, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night without pain. I also bought a refurbished laptop. One evening in late April, I sat at my new kitchen table, a mug of hot tea beside me, and opened a web browser. I typed in the name of the local community college, online bachelor's degree, business administration, open enrollment. I had given up a 1350 SAT score to save my parents from making a hard choice.
I
Had given up my youth to fund my sister's vanity.
but they couldn't take my brain.
They couldn't take my work ethic. I clicked apply. 2 years later, the espresso machine hissed, filling the flagship store with a rich, dark scent of roasted coffee. I wiped down the counter out of habit, even though I was wearing a blazer now. As the general manager of the highest grossing branch in the district, I didn't have to wipe counters, but I liked staying grounded. Hey, Regina, the regional director is looking at the Q3 projections. My assistant manager, a bright kid named Leo, called out from the back office.
He
Says we beat the quota by 14%. Tell him we're aiming for 20 in Q4, so he better prepare our bonuses. I called back with a smile. Life had settled into a beautiful, predictable rhythm. I worked during the day, studied at night, and built a life that was entirely my own. I had a group of friends, people from work, people from my online study groups who celebrated my birthdays with actual cakes. I had peace. I hadn't spoken to my family in 2.5 years. Occasionally, I'd get a blocked voicemail. I never listened to them.
but the
World is smaller than we think, and gossip always finds a way. I had run into my aunt at a grocery store a few months prior. From her, I learned the truth about what happened after I walked out. Without my monthly transfers, the facade of Sabrina's life shattered almost instantly. It turned out Sabrina wasn't a high-powered consultant. She was an entry-level assistant at a marketing firm who spent more time buying designer bags to impress her coworkers than actually working. When mom's money stopped coming in, Sabrina maxed out her credit cards to maintain the illusion. Eventually, she was fired for chronic absenteeism. Desperate, she moved back in with mom and dad. But without my money, the mortgage fell behind. Dad blamed mom for secretly giving the money away. Mom blamed Sabrina for being ungrateful. Sabrina blamed them both for ruining her life. The toxic ecosystem they had built, which had solely survived by feeding on me, had turned on itself and cannibalized. I remember nodding politely at my aunt, paying for my groceries, and walking to my car. I had expected to feel a sense of vindictive joy. Instead, I just felt a profound emptiness, followed by a wave of relief that I was no longer on that sinking ship. Excuse me. The voice pulled me out of my memories. I turned from the espresso machine. Standing on the other side of the counter was my mother. I froze. For a split second, the 26-year-old manager vanished, and I was the terrified little girl bracing for a slap. But then I really looked at her. Mom looked terrible. Her hair, usually perfectly dyed and styled, showed inches of gray roots. Her clothes looked rumpled, and the arrogant fire that used to burn in her eyes had been replaced by a frantic, nervous exhaustion. Behind her stood Sabrina. The golden child was unrecognizable. She wore a stained, oversized hoodie, her posture slumped, staring at the floor with dull, defeated eyes. Regina, Mom said. Her voice wavered. She looked around the bustling, upscale cafe, taking in my tailored blazer and the small, gold general manager pin on my lapel. We went to your old apartment. The landlord said you moved.
It
took us weeks to find out where you worked. What do you want, Mom? I asked. My voice didn't shake. It was even, polite, and completely devoid of warmth. I spoke to her the way I would speak to a difficult customer. Can we sit down? Please. Mom begged, clasping her hands together. It's about your sister. It's an emergency. I glanced at Leo, who was watching from the doorway, sensing the tension. Leo, hold the floor for 10 minutes, I said. I led them to a small table in the corner of the cafe. I didn't offer them
drinks.
I sat across from them, keeping my back straight, my hands resting lightly on the table. My hands, healed, manicured, steady. Speak, I said. Mom swallowed hard. We're going to lose the house, Regina. Your father and I, we're drowning. Sabrina got into some debt. Credit cards. Over $80,000. The interest keeps piling up. The collectors won't stop calling. They're threatening to sue. To garnish wages, your father had a minor heart attack last month from the stress. A flicker of sympathy passed through me for Dad, but I quickly stamped it out. He had made his choices. I'm sorry to hear about Dad's health, I said neutrally. But what does this have to do with me? Regina, please. Mom reached across the table, trying to grab my hand.
I
Smoothly pulled it back, resting it in my lap. Mom flinched, as if I had struck her.
You have a good job now.
Look at you. You're the manager. You must be making good money. We just need a loan.
Just 50,000 to get the
Collectors off Sabrina's back. You can take out a line of credit. We swear we'll pay you back. I looked at Sabrina. 80,000 in credit card debt? What did you buy? Sabrina? Sabrina finally looked up, her eyes defensive and venomous. I had to live.
I
Had rent, I had car payments. You wouldn't understand. You've always lived like
a rat.
Sabrina, shut up. Mom hissed, panicked. She turned back to me with a sickly, sweet, desperate smile. She's just stressed, Regina. She doesn't mean it.
We're family.
You're the older sister. You have a duty to help your family in times of crisis. You wouldn't let your own sister go bankrupt, would you? You wouldn't let your parents be homeless? I sat back in my chair. I looked at the two women who had defined my entire existence through pain and subjugation. I thought about the night I found out my SAT score. The way I had quietly folded the paper, sacrificing my dreams so they wouldn't have to struggle. I thought about the winter I washed dishes until my knuckles bled, sending my rent money home while I ate expired bread. Mom, I said softly. She leaned in, a spark of hope in her eyes. Yes, sweetie. Do you remember what you told me the night I left? I asked. Mom blinked, confused.
What?
No, Regina, we were all angry. People say things. You told me that in our family, you sacrifice for the one who has the most potential. That's how it works. Mom's face went chalk white. I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer. Sabrina has a bachelor's degree. She scored over 1,100 on her SATs. She's the smart one. She's the one with all the potential. So, I suggest she uses that massive brain of hers to figure out how to pay off her own debt. Regina. Mom screamed, scrambling to her feet, drawing the attention of half the cafe. You ungrateful, selfish bitch. We gave you life. You owe us. I gave you $150,000, I replied, my voice echoing clearly over the silence of the room. Consider my debt to you paid in full. Sabrina stood up, her fists clenched. You think you're so much better than us. Now? Because you pour coffee? You're nothing. You didn't even go to college. I looked at her, a genuine smile finally gracing my lips. Actually, Sabrina, I said, I graduate with my bachelor's in business administration next month.
Summa cum laude.
My company is paying for my master's program starting in the fall. Sabrina's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The last remaining pillar of her superiority, her education, crumbled into dust. She looked physically ill. Leo, I called out, not taking my eyes off them. Yeah, boss. Leo stepped out from behind the counter. These two women were just leaving. If they refuse to leave, or if they ever come back, call mall security and have them trespassed. You got it, Leo said, crossing his arms and stepping forward. Mom stared at me, tears of pure, impotent rage streaming down her face.
She
raised a shaking hand, pointing a finger at my chest just like she used to do when I was a terrified girl backed into a corner. But I wasn't in a corner anymore. I was standing in the center of the life I had built with my own two hands. You will die alone, Regina, Mom hissed, her voice trembling with venom. Without family, you have nothing. I looked at her, feeling a strange, profound sense of pity. If family means tearing each other apart to survive, I said quietly, then I'd rather be alone.
Goodbye, Mom.
I turned my back on them and walked into the office. I didn't look through the glass window to watch them leave. I didn't care to. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the Q3 projections. 3 years later, the spring air was crisp and warm, carrying the scent of blooming cherry blossoms across the university quad. The lawn was a sea of black robes and
mortarboards.
I stood near the edge of the crowd, adjusting the gold honor cords draped around
my neck.
Hold still. Let me get a picture, Claire demanded, holding up her phone.
She
Had taken the day off from her role as district manager just to be here. Beside her, Leo, now the general manager of my old store, was holding a ridiculously large bouquet of sunflowers. Smile, boss. Leo cheered. I laughed, a real, full-chested laugh, and posed for the camera. I was 30 years old. I was the newly appointed regional director of operations. I had my master's degree. I had a savings account that would allow me to buy my own house by next year. But more importantly, I had peace. After the photos were done, we sat on the grass, eating sandwiches Claire had
Packed.
my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number. Out of habit, I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, the transcription popped up on my screen. Regina, it's Dad. The bank foreclosed on the house. Mom left. Sabrina is living in her car. Please, if you have any heart left. I read the words. I felt a fleeting tug in my chest, a ghost of the little girl who just wanted her parents to be proud of her. But ghosts don't dictate the living. I had grieved them years ago. They were strangers to me now, strangers who had made their choices. I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt done. I tapped the screen, deleted the voicemail, and blocked the number. Everything okay? Claire asked, noticing me looking at my phone. I looked up at her, then at Leo, who was currently trying to balance a sunflower on his nose. I looked at the bright blue sky, the historic brick buildings of the university, and the gold cords resting against my gown. Yeah, I said, putting the phone back in my pocket and reaching for another sandwich. Everything is perfect.